I still remember the exact moment I found out. Just like a punch to the gut that knocks the wind out of you before you can even start to scream. It was late afternoon when I got back from work, feeling exhausted, ready to crash on the couch and binge-watch some dumb show to forget about the stress of the day. But as soon as I stepped through the door, my mom, without even looking up from the stove, said something that made the room spin. "We think it's time for you to move out," she said casually, as though it was some kind of casual suggestion. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I froze for a second, staring at her back, trying to make sense of the words. My brain didn't want to process it. Was this a joke? Did I mishear her? I mean, I'd been living with them ever since I graduated, sure, but that was because I was saving up, getting my shit together after a breakup that had almost destroyed me. It wasn't like I was some kind of mooch. I could feel my throat go dry, my body already reacting to the shock. "What?" I said, unsure if I was even capable of making words come out at this point. My mom finally turned around, her face unreadable, and she let out a sigh like this conversation was long overdue. "You need to start standing on your own 2 feet. You're not a kid anymore. You've been here long enough. It's time to buy your own house." I stared at her, feeling like I was missing something. This wasn't just a conversation about me being independent. This was something much deeper. I glanced at my dad, sitting at the kitchen table, and noticed that he didn't look surprised at all. In fact, he didn't even seem particularly bothered by it. He looked up from his paper and said, "We think you should move out. There's no reason to stay here any longer. You've got your own life now. Time to live it." "Are you serious?" I could feel my pulse in my ears, and the heat was rising in my chest. "What do you mean, no reason? I've been living here because I stopped myself before I could say more. The words were choking me, and I realized just how alone I suddenly felt. "I don't even have the money for a house yet. You know that." Mom interrupted me before I could finish. "It's time to take responsibility. We're not going to support you forever. You're not a part of this family anymore in the way you think you are." The way she said it, the absolute finality in her voice, sent a cold shock through me. I blinked hard, trying to shake the disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" I was still trying to keep my voice steady, but it wasn't working. "What do you mean? I'm not part of this family. You're my parents." Dad put down his newspaper finally, his expression flat, distant. "You don't get it, do you? You're an adult. Your place is out there, not here. We've given you enough time to figure things out. We've been patient, but it's over now." His eyes flicked to my mom, and there was something in the way they exchanged that look, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was resignation. I didn't understand what I was hearing. I couldn't breathe. The weight of it hit me all at once. My parents, my own parents, were telling me to leave. They weren't just kicking me out. They were severing some kind of connection, a connection I didn't even know was broken until now. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have a place in this world. I was an outsider in my own home. I couldn't process it fast enough. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, and for a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at them, feeling everything inside of me break. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I needed to be alone. I needed to think. I went straight to my room, closed the door behind me, and let myself sink onto the bed. I stared up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was this some kind of test? A challenge? But no, there was no mistaking the tone in their voices. It was final. It was real. They wanted me out. I could hear the faint sound of voices in the kitchen, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. I needed time to figure out what to do, but that time was slipping away, and all I could do was sit there in the dark, feeling the weight of the decision hanging over me like a storm I wasn't prepared for. The next few days were a blur of confusion and frustration. Every time I saw my parents, they acted like everything was normal, like the conversation we had the other night had never happened. Mom kept making her usual breakfast. Dad continued reading his newspaper, and I was left to sit there, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. The house felt cold, even though the heat was running full blast. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking around in someone else's life. The routine was gone, the one thing that had always kept me grounded. I couldn't breathe in my own home anymore, and I sure as hell couldn't pretend like nothing was happening. I tried to talk to them again. The words felt like they were caught in my throat every time I tried, but I had to know what was going on. I had to understand what had led to this. why they were suddenly so willing to throw me out without any warning. My thoughts were all over the place, bouncing between anger, confusion, and hurt. So, one evening after dinner, when the silence between us had reached a breaking point, I finally asked again, "Why? Why are you doing this?" I forced the words out, feeling them crack in my chest. "What changed? What did I do?" Mom looked up from her plate, her eyes narrowing slightly. Dad didn't even flinch. His face remained impassive, but I could see that look in his eyes, the one that made me feel like I was nothing more than an inconvenience, like I was some problem that had to be solved. "We've already explained," she said, voice tight, almost defensive. "You're an adult. You need to stop relying on us. We've done everything we could to help you get on your feet, and now it's time to do it on your own." It wasn't the answer I needed. It wasn't the answer I wanted, either. I stared at her, trying to keep my voice steady, but my anger was bubbling up. "I don't understand. This isn't just about me getting my life together. You don't just throw someone out of their home because they haven't made it yet. Why now? Why didn't you say something earlier? You knew I wasn't ready." Dad put his paper down then, the first time in days that he had actually paid any attention to me. His eyes were cold, almost calculating. "You're not a child. We shouldn't have to keep telling you what to do. You've had enough time to figure it out." I felt my fists ball up at my sides, the heat in my chest rising again. "This isn't about time," I said, my voice shaking. "This is about you pushing me away. There's something else going on. You're not telling me something." The room went quiet after that. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes, and Dad's expression didn't change. I felt like I had crossed some invisible line, like I had said the one thing I shouldn't have. The tension in the room thickened, making it hard to breathe. "Stop being dramatic," my dad finally said, his voice clipped. "We're just trying to help you, but we can't do it for you anymore." I stared at them, the words hanging in the air like a thick fog, suffocating everything around us. "Help me," I echoed. "By kicking me out? By telling me I have no family here? That's how you help me?" Mom stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. She didn't look at me as she turned and walked into the other room. I could hear her quiet footsteps fading down the hall, and then I was left with my dad. He sat there, his face a mask of indifference. For a second, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "Maybe it's time you stopped thinking of us as your safety net," Dad said after a long pause, his voice colder now. "We've done what we could. We've given you a roof, food, everything. But you need to face the reality that you can't stay here forever. You never even tried to understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You don't know what I've been through. You don't see how hard it's been, how much I've struggled. You're just pushing me out because it's easier for you." For a moment, he looked like he might respond, but instead, he stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone at the table. I could feel the weight of everything crushing down on me again, that sinking feeling in my chest that had been there since the moment I walked into the house and heard those words. The silence in the house was deafening, and for the first time, I realized just how alone I was. My parents weren't on my side. They weren't looking out for me. They were just done. The days that followed were no better. I tried to leave the house to clear my head, but it didn't help. Every time I walked out the door, the weight of the situation followed me. My friends were no help either. They didn't understand. None of them had parents like mine. They didn't get why I couldn't just find a place to live on my own. They told me to just suck it up, that I was capable of handling this. But the truth was, I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared for this kind of betrayal. I wasn't ready to be alone. And then, something strange started to happen. I started noticing things. Small things, but things that didn't sit right. I found my mom's old phone charger in a drawer, tucked away like it didn't belong there. I noticed she was spending a lot of time in the study, typing away at her computer in the evenings when she thought no one was watching. My dad had become distant, colder than usual. He didn't ask about my day anymore, didn't make his usual sarcastic jokes. I felt like I was living with two people who were strangers to me, and I couldn't put my finger on what had changed. One night, after my parents had gone to bed, I decided to search the study. I knew it was a risk, but I needed answers. I needed to know why they had turned on me. What had happened to make them act this way? What was going on behind the closed doors of this house? So, I snuck into the study, my heart racing with each step. As I rummaged through the desk drawers, I found a stack of letters. Letters that had been carefully folded, sealed, and tucked out of sight. My fingers trembled as I opened the first one, the words leaping out at me like a punch in the gut. It was from a lawyer. My parents had been planning something big, and I had no idea. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found. The letters were still sitting on the desk, buried under a pile of papers I hadn't even bothered to look at. I knew I should have just left them where I found them, but curiosity gnawed at me, and the need for answers drove me to make the biggest mistake of my life. I had no idea how deep the hole I was digging for myself really was. I slipped the letters into my jacket pocket and decided that I'd deal with the consequences later. Right now, I needed to know what the hell was going on. I knew I couldn't show my parents what I had found. Not yet. I needed to figure this out on my own. The moment I stepped into the living room, I could feel the air shift. It was like my presence was an inconvenience to them, like I was intruding on some hidden agenda they were working on without me. But even as I sat down at the table, the weight of the letters in my pocket felt heavier than ever. It wasn't long before I realized that every glance they shot me, every time they avoided my eyes, was a sign. It was all connected. My parents weren't just pushing me out, they were hiding something. And that something was bigger than me. I decided to go through the letters in private. I waited until they were both out of the house that afternoon, heading out for one of their usual errands that I'd never been told about. I took a deep breath, slipped the letters from my jacket, and unfolded the first one. The lawyer's name was on the top of the page, but it was the next few lines that made my blood run cold. It was a legal document, one I'd never seen before, discussing the transfer of assets, a trust fund, and instructions for the division of property. My name was nowhere to be found. I blinked hard, feeling my stomach twist. There was a clause at the end of the letter, and it was clear as day. My parents had written me out of their will. Not only that, but the trust fund was going to be entirely controlled by them until they died. That's when the words started to make sense. You have no family. It wasn't just about me needing to grow up. They had already made their decision. They didn't want me around anymore, not just for my sake, but because I was a liability. I wasn't going to inherit anything. I wasn't even supposed to know this was happening. My hands were shaking as I held the letter. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just read. What had I missed? What had changed? I suddenly felt like I was standing in the middle of a storm, and I had no idea which direction the wind was blowing. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. That's when I got a text from Sarah, an old friend from high school. She had always been the one person I could count on, the one person who never judged me or made me feel like I was a failure. I hadn't talked to her in months, but her message was a lifeline in a sea of confusion. Hey, I know this might sound random, but I've been talking to my cousin. He works for a private investigator and mentioned something that might interest you. Call me when you can. I didn't even think twice. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. What is it, Sarah? I asked, my voice tight with urgency. What do you know? There was a pause on the other end of the line before she spoke. I don't know how to put this, but I think your parents might be in trouble. Or at least, they're hiding something from you. It's about the business they've been involved in. That was all she had to say. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I forced myself to stay calm. What business? I don't know what you're talking about. They never told you, did they? About what they've been doing. My cousin said they've been running some kind of scheme for years. It's all legal stuff, but it's shady. The private investigator was hired to dig into their finances, and he came across a few things that don't add up. I think they've been hiding something from you for a long time. I didn't know what to think. I felt like I was being pulled in 100 different directions, and every answer I got only led to more questions. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, still struggling to keep my voice steady. Because I think you need to know the truth. And I don't think your parents are going to tell you. I don't know how deep it goes, but it's not just about the house or the will. They've been involved in something bigger. You need to talk to that investigator. He might be able to help. I had no idea what to do with this information. The weight of the letter was still heavy in my hands, and now, on top of everything else, I had this new thread to pull on. Could my parents really be involved in something illegal? Could everything I knew about them be a lie? I didn't want to believe it, but I knew I had to find out. I thanked Sarah and hung up, already making plans to contact the private investigator. My mind was spinning. What kind of people were my parents? And why had they kept all of this from me? As I looked down at the letter again, I felt a cold pit in my stomach. I wasn't just fighting for my place in their home anymore. I was fighting for something much bigger, something I wasn't sure I could handle. I decided to call the investigator Sarah mentioned. It was risky, but it was the only lead I had. The phone rang once, then twice, before a gruff voice answered. Detective Michaels, he said, his tone no nonsense. I'm looking for information on a couple named Karen and Robert Myers. I was told you might know something about them. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him flipping through papers, the sound of pages turning. Yeah, I know the Myers family. Why do you want to know about them? I hesitated, but I knew I had to be honest. Because they're my parents. And I think they're hiding something from me. Something big. I heard a low exhale. You're about to uncover things that you might not want to know. If you're sure about this, I can help. But be ready. This isn't going to be easy. I could hear the warning in his voice, but I didn't back down. I'm ready. Tell me everything you know. And that was when I realized that my life, the life I thought I knew, was about to change forever. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and fear. I didn't know what to expect from Detective Michaels or what he might reveal, but I couldn't afford to stop now. I couldn't just ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was off. Every time I looked at my parents, I saw strangers. They weren't the people I had grown up with, the people who were supposed to love and protect me. They were distant, cold, and completely unreachable. They had shut me out, and I was left to figure it out on my own. But every step I took toward the truth felt like I was sinking deeper into something I wasn't prepared for. The phone call with Michaels had shaken me more than I cared to admit. His warning had been clear. This wasn't going to be easy, and I might not want to know the truth. But I had to know. I couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer. He had promised to dig deeper, but I didn't expect him to call back so quickly. When the phone rang late one night, I was already in bed, trying to calm the nerves that had been running wild all day. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but I knew it was him. I answered immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. It's done, Michaels said, his voice low, almost like he was trying to keep the conversation private. I've got the information you asked for, but you're not going to like it. I'm not sure I can handle much more bad news, I said, my voice shaking. Just tell me, what's going on? There was a long pause before he spoke again. Your parents aren't just hiding money or assets. They've been involved in a scheme for years, laundering money through their business. But that's not the worst part. There's a bigger picture here. They've been running scams for decades, using their connections to pull off illegal deals and funneling money into offshore accounts. I felt a chill spread across my body as his words sank in. My mind couldn't wrap around the idea. My parents, who I had trusted my whole life, had been criminals? How had they managed to keep this secret from me all this time? Why didn't they tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would they cut me off and throw me out when I didn't even know about this? Michaels took a deep breath before answering. The deeper you dig, the more dangerous it gets. Your parents are scared, and I think they've known for a while that their past is catching up with them. They've been working with some dangerous people. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you if they thought you were a threat. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. You're saying they're involved in something bigger than just financial scams? Something dangerous. Yes, but there's more, Michaels continued. Your father has been trying to cover his tracks for years. He's been laundering money through his business and hiding it in various accounts. But he's also been involved with people who have ties to organized crime. And your mother? She's not as innocent as she pretends to be. She knew everything, and I'm willing to bet she was just as involved as he was. I felt like I was suffocating. Everything I thought I knew about my parents had been turned upside down. I had always assumed they were ordinary people, just trying to make their way in the world. But now, it seemed they had built an entire life around lies. My entire childhood felt like a lie. What do I do now? I asked, my voice shaky with fear and confusion. What if they find out I know? What if they come after me? Michaels was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. You need to be careful. I'm going to help you, but you need to make sure your next steps are calculated. You're already in too deep, and I don't want to see you get hurt. I'd suggest you stay away from them for a while, at least until we figure out what their next move is. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to confront my parents and finally have them tell me everything. But I knew I couldn't. They had already shown me how far they were willing to go to push me away. I had no idea what they would do if they found out I knew the truth. The next day, I couldn't bear to look at them. I stayed in my room most of the day, waiting for something to change, for someone to tell me what I was supposed to do. But nothing happened. They went about their day as if everything was fine, as if I hadn't just discovered the darkest part of their lives. I couldn't understand how they could pretend like nothing was wrong. I decided to take Michael's advice and stay out of their way. It felt like I was living in a constant state of fear, but I knew it was the only option. I started looking into things on my own, trying to find more information about the people my parents were involved with. I contacted the lawyer who had written the letters, hoping he might be able to provide some insight, but he refused to speak to me. It seemed like everyone was covering for them, and I had no idea who I could trust anymore. Then, things took a turn I wasn't expecting. I got a call from Michael's late one evening, his voice urgent. "I've got news. Your parents are planning something. They're getting ready to make a move, probably within the next few days. They're nervous. They're trying to cover their tracks, and they're getting desperate." I felt my stomach twist into knots. "What are they planning? What do I do?" "You need to be careful," Michael said again, his voice almost warning me. "I don't think you're safe there anymore. I'm telling you this for your own good. Leave. Get out while you can." I didn't even hesitate. I packed a bag, grabbed what I could, and left without a word. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. The people I had once called family weren't who they seemed, and I had no place among them anymore. As I walked out the door, I realized that this was the beginning of something bigger than I could have ever imagined. The world felt heavier than ever after I left. I didn't know where to go, what to do, or who to trust anymore. The streets were unfamiliar, the city felt like it had changed overnight, and I was no longer the person I had been just days ago. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been a lie. My parents, the people I trusted more than anyone, had been living double lives. The realization that everything I had been taught to believe was a facade was too much to handle all at once. I had walked out, but the truth was still hanging over me like a dark cloud I couldn't outrun. I didn't go back to the apartment I had been renting, didn't go back to the places I had always turned to for comfort. My world had fractured in a way I didn't know how to fix. All I had left were the few things I had thrown into a bag and the knowledge that my life was in danger. I didn't even know if I could trust Michaels anymore, but the few words he'd said kept ringing in my mind. Be careful. He had warned me, told me to get out. But now, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I kept telling myself I needed answers, that I couldn't let it end like this, but with every passing day, I grew more afraid. 2 days after leaving, I finally contacted Michaels again. I had spent the time trying to come to terms with everything, figuring out where I could go, but nothing made sense. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I needed him. I needed someone to tell me what to do next. "Detective," I said when he picked up, trying to steady my shaking voice. "I need your help again. I don't know where else to turn." "I figured I'd hear from you soon," Michaels said, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. "What's going on? I don't know what to do. They're hiding so much, and I'm alone out here. I can't go back to them. They know I found out, and I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up, but instead, he said, "You're right to feel this way. It's not just your parents who are dangerous. It's the people they've been involved with. I've been trying to track down any leads, but things are getting messy. The more I uncover, the more it feels like they've planned everything, every move they've made for years. Why are they doing this? What do they want from me?" I asked, my voice rising, the frustration spilling over. I wanted answers, needed them, but nothing was making sense. "I don't have all the answers, but I've got a lead I'm chasing down. It's not over yet. You need to lay low for a while longer. I can't promise anything, but I'll do what I can to get you the information you need." I wasn't sure I could keep waiting for him to figure things out. Every second that passed, I felt more vulnerable. I wanted control. I wanted to know what I was supposed to do, but there were too many forces at play that I couldn't comprehend. "I can't just hide forever," I said, pacing around the small room I'd rented. "I have to confront them. I need to get to the bottom of this. I can't just be a passive bystander in my own life." Michael sighed on the other end, and I could hear him rubbing his hand over his face in frustration. "I get it. But if you confront them now, it could make things worse. You don't know the full extent of what they're involved in. You don't know how dangerous these people are. I'm not going to sit around and wait for something to happen. I'm not letting them destroy me," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. I had never felt so lost, but this was the only way forward. I couldn't let them control my life anymore. "I'm going to need you to trust me on this one," Michael said, his voice low and firm. "We're close to figuring this out, but it's going to take time. If you confront them now, you're not just risking your life. You're risking everything we've uncovered so far. Let me handle this. I'm going to need you to lay low for a bit longer. Once I have more information, We can make a move, but not until then. I didn't know if I could keep waiting. I wanted to feel like I had control again. But in that moment, I realized Michaels was the only one trying to help me, the only one who wasn't trying to push me away or cover up the truth. Fine, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. But I need you to tell me what's going on. I can't just keep waiting in the dark. He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke again, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. They've been running a lot of illegal operations, and it's not just about money. They've been laundering for years, working with criminals who are known for getting violent when things don't go their way. But there's something else. What else? I asked, my pulse quickening. They've been hiding a part of the business that's tied to some very dangerous people. They've been using the business as a front for much darker dealings. Your parents aren't just criminals. They've been part of a larger organization. The more I dig, the more I realize that this isn't just about your family anymore. It's about something bigger, something that goes beyond the money and the property. They've been covering their tracks for years, and now it's catching up with them. But you being involved, he hesitated again. It's making them more desperate. I felt a wave of cold panic rush through me. I was a pawn in their game, and I hadn't even realized it until now. The danger wasn't just from my parents. It was from the people they had been hiding from me all this time. I couldn't escape them. What do I do now? I asked, my voice hollow, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Lay low, trust me, and let me find a way to end this. You're not alone in this anymore, I promise you. I ended the call with my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know how long I could stay hidden, how long I could keep running from the life I had known. But as the days passed, one thing became clear. I wasn't going to let this define me. I was going to take control, find the truth, and make sure my parents faced the consequences of the life they had built on lies and betrayal. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But I was no longer a passive player in my own story. Now, I was the one who would decide how it ended.